Here is an overview of the wiring for the convertible at the back of the roof where the motors etc. are. This is the left hand side, which has more connections. Similar on the right hand side, but there's just less of it. Big plug comes from the front. It immediately comes off, joins into the microswitch that lives down here, then goes into the back of the motor, then comes and joins down here, and then it splits into two, goes down to the window for the defog, and then it splits off and goes up to the front to the locks. It's really important to note where these all join. Having worked on a few convertible tops before, where electrical wires get routed is critical. Porsche have done a really nice job of organising all of this so things don't get damaged, but when you pull all these off, it's going to be obvious that, I certainly was with this roof, that a lot of the bits that hold everything, there's these little plugs that go into numerous places, they will come loose because the electrical tape just degrades over time. I would mark like I've done there and then retape all of those so they're good for another 10 years or so. Also, I take photographs of where everything is because it's a little bit confusing, but enough said that where they plug into is, there's one there on the motor, there on the motor, there's one back here prior to it going into the back of the motor here, and that one there goes on the underside there, and they're quite specific, their locations, so it's pretty important to make sure that they're in the right spot. Down here where it then splits off and goes down into this junction, it just pushes onto a stud here, just a threaded stud, so it just pushes straight out the top of that. And all of these, again, quite specific locations, mark them, retape them. There's a piece of electrical tape around this one here that I've removed, so put that back there. And then it runs up to the front to the locks. So the one that goes up to the front of the locks, to remove that harness completely is going to be difficult because you need to drill out rivets, and unless you want to replace the harness itself, it doesn't serve any purpose. You could replace the canvas without removing the wiring, so I would just leave that in place. For the connections down the bottom here onto the defog, not sure if you probably can't see that, but there's a tiny little hole in the plug connection there that a plunger on the underside of this goes into. So to get this off, if you just pull hard, it will not come off. You've got to pull the rubber back a little bit and then stick a little sort of tool down in there and push that plunger out of the way, and then that'll come off quite easily. And that's the same on both sides. The left-hand side harness you can easily remove because it's just this bit here, but on this side, because of all those other connections that go up to the front, you'll need to leave it in place. When disconnecting these plugs, I would suggest a removal tool like that. I would suggest not just grabbing these and trying to pull them out, because if they break, that's going to be a bit untidy, because you want these all to be in exactly the right position and no loose wires floating around the back. So wiggle those in there and then just lever those out. The ones that run along down towards the windows, they still work perfectly okay. You sort of just dig those out. But it's going to be far more successful at getting those out without breaking, etc., if you use a tool like that. The microswitches that live on the side of the motor mechanism, there's one on each side. That's what they look like on the outside. There's 3 rivets and there's a connection underneath here, which when you remove the roof you get access to. To get out the microswitch, you need to drill out those 3 rivets, and then it comes out. That's the one from the other side. That's what it looks like on the outside. It's a microswitch that's stuck in there and looks like it's epoxied into this little housing. So I don't think it's something I tried, as you can see, to try and dig this out to see if I could get in here and work out what was inside, but I don't think that's the case. So if these things are broken, you're pretty much obliged to go to Porsche and get a new one. The way they work is they're just a very basic micro switch with a little plunger, as you can see there, that gets pressed in to close the circuit. When it's like that, the circuit is open. And on the right hand side there's the single one, and on the left hand side, which is this one here, you have 2 of them. And the way they work, can you see these on the big sprocket here? Connected to that are these wedges, and what happens is as it moves around, and obviously the microswitch is down in here, when it rides up on one of these wedges, this is going to depress that microswitch. There are two of them here because this has two to show you separate things. So if you look at the video that I did on the roof, the one on the right hand side, the single one, is signal, and those on the left hand side are signal 1 and signal 2. And signal from the right hand side and signal 1 do exactly the same thing. And you can see these wedges here. It rides up on this one here. There's another corresponding one down the other end there, which opens the circuit when it gets to the extremities. The other one here, signal 2, that wedge you can't see, but it stops about here, gives an indication when the roof is about 20 degrees from fully closed. And as you move the roof, hopefully you'll be able to see this. You can see the little plunger there being depressed as it comes off that wedge, and as it rotates down to fully closed, it depresses it again. The motor and electrics at the back of the convertible system. You've got a single motor there that drives the worm drive here through a small gearbox, and to drive this shaft here that slots into there like that. Out of the way. So that sits there like that, and you can see that drives this big sprocket which connects to the big arm and then just drives everything back and forth. The interesting thing about these motors is that they are exactly the same parts, left and right. They're just assembled a little bit differently. So I'm not sure if you can see where that gearbox here, that's perfectly symmetrical. And for example, the piece at the front here that holds onto the motor that takes it in and out of manual mode, that can either be installed there or it can be installed on the other side there. So all you need to do is pull off the motor, move that to that side there, and then swap the motor around, and it would be the one for the other side. But let's have a look at how we pull this thing apart. You can do this from the workshop manual when it's sitting in the car. I reckon it'd be a little bit difficult to work your way around this, but if it can stop you from having to remove the roof, then that's probably going to be a good thing if you need to replace one of the motors. You can't replace the transmission, you need to replace that with the roof out, whereas the motor can come off in the car. So the first thing you would do is, the way it sits there, this is going to be the outside of the car, so this slots into that big arm. So we need to remove this little clip here. That comes off, and then that pin just pushes out. And then from there, the only other thing that's holding this in is this thing at the front here. And if we just move that back like that, then that allows us to disengage it from the gears, and that whole thing comes out. So there's our motor there, there's the worm drive inside. If we were trying to remove the electrical connector, before we did that, we just need to unpick these clips here. That comes off. That one there also comes off, and there's our motor assembly and the plug in the back. We can disconnect that. And I will show you how to pull apart this thing. The first thing we'd need to do is remove that, which is pretty simple. You just remove the E-clip and then just knock that pin out the other side. Putting it back in is a little bit more involved, and then we can remove those screws and open up the gearbox, re-grease that if required. To put the motor in to the gearbox, the little knobs at the front there, slot that in there, and then we're going to slide it in the back and then just slide it forward, and it just clicks straight into place. It's engaged in there, and then we can put that pin in and the clip on it. To remove this spring-loaded sort of clip that holds onto the motor at the front here, you'll see a little E-clip here. I've already removed that. Just get a small screwdriver in there and remove that, and then that can just be tapped out. And then the pin will stay there. You can pull that out, but that whole thing just comes off. So to get this spring contraption back on, one of the problems that we have is there's a fair bit of tension on this spring when it goes into place. And as we're trying to tap that pin in, this just wants to come out and move all over the place. So here's what I suggest. This seemed to be reasonably successful. When you first put that pin in, tap it in so it's proud just maybe a millimetre or two, so that will sit there over the top like that. Not so much that you can't get the spring in, it still needs to be able to slide in there okay. And then get something to jam down this little slot in here to make sure that this thing can't come out. I've just used a metal ruler and that just holds it in there nicely, and now that won't move. And now what I can do is use a clamp to press down on this like that, to press that down so I can slot the pin down. The problem with this though is that if I just get a clamp and press that down, it won't press it down far enough. So all I've done is I've rolled up a little piece of sandpaper so that it grips it and presses down on the spring, so when I compress it in there, it's going to drive it down to the correct position where I can then knock that pin into place. And once you've got that compressed down, you should be able to just look straight down there through the hole and see the pin out the other side. And now I can gently tap it in. And what I've found is at the last little bit, you can see it doesn't really want to go in there. It's not perfectly aligned. So all I do is I just get a pair of vice grips, put that on there like that, and that just pops that into place. And now I can put that E-clip back on it again. To disassemble our little gearbox here, 6 screws around the outside, just remove those, and then this cover just comes straight off. If you just push a little bit from this side here, it'll just open things up a little bit, just gives you a little bit more room to allow that to come off, because it needs to come around that edge there. And then there's your little gear set that's all riveted together. That keys into the inside of that, and that shaft can just pull straight out like that. Graphite based grease is what you want to put on the inside of this. It's probably enough that's just been flung off around that hasn't been really used by the gearbox at all, that you just scrape out with your finger and cover all the gears again with. But if you wanted to replace the grease, then a graphite based grease is what you're after. And it only goes back in one way, so you just need to rotate it around and find where all the screw holes align and then install those. If you're removing the motors, I'd suggest just re-greasing these shafts, both that bit there and that bit there, as well as the gears prior to installation. And also on the big gear down here, I'd put some grease on that. You can quite easily do that with the roof in the car or on the car and the roof in service position, but obviously this bit here you can only do with the motors out.